Welcome to the Untold Civil War. I am with Ron Coddington, a personal mentor of mine and sponsor of the show, great friend. And we're going to be doing a little after action review of the Civil War Faces show, which I went to, and it was an amazing experience. Thank you so much for having me down there and being such a great host. I really enjoyed it. Being my first Civil War show, let me tell you, I'm addicted now. I got to go to all of them now. So
Oh,
thank you so much.
thank you, Paul. It was great to be able to hang out with you, and it was a wonderful show. And just neat that you get a chance to sort of check out how all of that moves and all the activity going on. So I'm so delighted that you could attend.
So, for people who are watching this and might not know exactly what the Civil War Faces show is, can you explain to them what exactly the show is, what's happening there?
Yes, we have. We wanted to create a place where collectors could come together and be able to do one thing that they love and something that connects all of us together, which is to buy old photos, right? I mean, that's the essence of it, right? So you come there and you've got dealers that come from different places around the country, and they're bringing all their stuff to sell. And so we're hanging out and having an opportunity to do that. That is it's the Civil War collectors marketplace. And I love that. But I also love the idea of bringing some education and some awareness and a little bit of scholarship to complement and to maybe balance that transactional marketplace. So the night before the show, we have a speakers event, and we call it Civil War Talks. And this year, as you heard, we had three collectors who were talking about their experience as collectors and how they came to be focused on particular aspects of collecting and getting to show examples from their collections. So there's that element too. And we also usually build in some sort of a third part of this is some sort of a trip. This year, as you know, we were going to go to Bluff for a tour of that consequential battlefield that most folks don't really know much about, but it plays a really important role between Bull Run, first Bull Run, and the events of 1862. Unfortunately, because of the Washington weather, we had to postpone it. But we've done things in the past, like tours, sort of behind the curtain tours of the Library of Congress, the National Portrait Gallery, those sorts of events. So those three components are really part of the Civil War Collectors Weekend.
Well, I know I was really looking forward to the Battle of Ball's Bluff tour. I know that's really, to me, that battle is truly untold Civil War. The fact that it's such a small battle, most people probably have never heard of it. And then, like you said, it plays a huge role politically in the war, with bodies washing up by Washington, D.C. and that old political part is pretty wild.
Yeah.
But like you said, unfortunately, the weather wasn't cooperating. As I was telling you, I couldn't believe I drove all the way from New York City, and there I was in Virginia, shoveling snow off of my car, going,
I
I don't
know.
think this is how this is supposed to work. Um, regardless, though, we did have the speakers, and that went phenomenal. I thought those speakers did a very, very good job.
Yeah, I think it really pleased me that we're able to get the speakers that we had because they came from very different places. Craig James talking about African American photography and how that really helped his awareness and his approach about thinking about those individuals, the enslaved men, enslaved women in photographs that are in some cases, shunted off to the side. And in his mind, they're an important part of the story. And for him to be able to talk about that with such passion, I thought was wonderful. And then you've got Fred Taylor, who was talking about a North Carolina photographer and his journey during the war years. It sort of gave you some insights into where creativity and artistry meets the entrepreneurship in the South during a very tumultuous period. So that really was interesting to me. And then our third speaker talking about the Western, the war in the West, which is so often neglected, and looking at a collection of Midwestern soldiers and talking about those battles that were a big part of their existence, I think was really a powerful lesson to all of us to understand that the war is not something that occurred in Virginia and Pennsylvania and Maryland. It did, but it was also part of Mississippi and Arkansas and across the many states of the Union.
Yeah, and a couple things I got out of it. The second speaker spoke on the North Carolina images, how he used a chair to identify that particular photographer. You know, the chair in the background.
Well, even
Or
more specifically, the finial
yes,
on top of the chair.
yes, yes. That
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
I mean, that was a great example of like what we talk about Civil War photo sleuthing, right? Going down that rabbit hole and looking at that particular image, looking at the regiments that are represented by the guys posing by that chair, and then cross-referencing primary sources like letters about, okay, where did these regiments all cross over, what city specifically or what town, and narrowing it down to find that one photographer. I thought that was amazing. Yeah.
I was say these little photographs are packed with, they're little time capsules filled with information. That finial, the person who's sitting in the chair to which the finial is attached, the clothing he's wearing, if there's a backdrop, if there's a name on it, you've just got this snapshot, this time capsule of data, and it's out there for anyone to explore, right? And that's where you start to uncover these mysteries and untold stories. It's endlessly fascinating.
Oh yeah. And then finally the John Wayne image, if I could call it that. That was a wild story. I could not believe that. So essentially it was an image that he was able to identify, and in the end it turned out that one of the people in the image was John Wayne's father, right?
I believe that's correct.
And that was wild, and I had no idea that John Wayne's father not only served in the Civil War and had that experience in the war, pretty horrific experience fighting in the war, but then he had served in the same regiment as the Earp brothers, Wyatt Earp. And I thought, well, yeah, that's a regiment I would not want to be on the other end of. You know, which is a story from the Western theater, and we don't talk about the Western theater. So there you go. If you have any John Wayne fans watching this, study the Western theater. That's where all that is. So that's all the good stuff.
Well, it also, I think is fair to say that I love it when stories like that come out, because they begin to connect to different time periods in history. And I think it's wonderful when you can look at the Civil War and realize how it touched people in so many different ways. And sometimes it's connected to a celebrity that you would never think about that. And so that the third collector, John Walsh, who told that story, he did that several times in his talk, just connecting the events of the events and people of the war to different time periods in history. And the reason that I'm excited about that is not only because it's the iconic John Wayne, but because it helps you to understand how big an impact this 4-year period, and by extension, the many years before and after that we're dealing with the political issues connected to it, really touches who we are, popular culture, everything.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The speakers were great. I really enjoyed those, but couldn't stay out late. Had to be up early because the actual show was the next day,
Yeah.
which you helped me get into. So that was a lot of fun too. I felt that I had the backstage pass, you
Hey,
know?
you had the gold military images pass, my friend.
Yes, absolutely. It was awesome. I got the backstage pass. I was in there and watching the dealers set up. It was really exciting, to say the least. And I met a lot of collectors or dealers, I should say, that I have bought images from, that I have talked to, that I've interviewed. Um, Mr. Medhurst was there, who I've
Yeah.
interviewed, an episode coming out with him shortly.
Mhm.
And also, Jim and Sheila were there from the
Yes.
Excelsior Brigade, who are now
Yes.
sponsors of the show. So it's great to see them and meet with them. And I've bought several images from them. I told them that they were the ones who got me into this mess because they sold me that 179th New York image, and I've
Yes.
been addicted ever since. So, and Jim's been trying to buy it back from me. So we'll go back and forth on that. But how did you like how the show went? I mean, I thought it went pretty flawlessly, right?
Yeah, the setup time is where you've got all that early action is unfolding. So as you saw, there's people lining up at the doors with their carts full of boxes and all of that. So you're getting in there and you're getting to your assigned table, getting your name tags and all of that. So there's that moment in time where I'm sort of busy greeting people and making sure they got what they need, and making sure everybody gets any needs they have fulfilled. So I'm going over to hotel staff and saying, hey, we need a sign to do something, or we need an extension cord. So there's those little minor things going on. But for me, it's sort of part of the fun of making sure everybody gets set up and feels comfortable. And then when it's showtime, right, then you've got folks coming in. And despite the weather challenges we had, and also in a new location, a little bit further outside of the DC area, because our old venue was torn down as they're building a new hotel, which I guess we'll be in at some future point. It was well attended, and the folks that came through, some of the images that they shared with me that I saw were just crazy fantastic, and probably also worthy of noting. This particular show is centered on photography that includes the Civil War period, but also goes earlier into the era of daguerreotypes, 1839 up until around 1861 or so, even a little bit later sometimes. And then a bunch of other type of formats from the 19th into the early 20th century. So Civil War photography was a big chunk of that. But I'm seeing people wandering around with beautiful tintypes that are full plate tintypes. I'm seeing wonderful Civil War ambrotypes and tintypes. And because everybody is like-minded, we're all there because we love the collecting. It's like a bunch of kids in a candy store. We're just loving it.
Absolutely. Speaking of images that we got to see and such, did you get handed any to scan that you remember that really stood out to you?
Yes, there was several Confederate images that I scanned, and those you will probably see in future issues of the magazine. There was one image on the Union side of a guy, and his name is written. It's an oval image, and the guy's name is written on it, and it is a photo composite with John Brown in the background, which was made in the early 60s using some 1860s Photoshop. So clearly there was some connection between this individual and John Brown. So that's an interesting project. So that's a couple of things I saw. And then some interesting pieces that you might not at first blush think about the war, for example, a beautiful, beautiful pair of images of a mother and then a son. And the mother is standing, it's a wonderful pose, and she's looking like wistfully away from the camera. The boy is holding a toy sword, and on the back is written their names, the date of a July 1862 date, and the names of the mother and turns out the son, and below it, it says the name of the father, and the father was a Civil War general. Let me see, Charles Lorcombe Abbott, and he was in DC Corps of Engineers. And so, you know, these images were taken a year after, less than a year after he was wounded at First Bull Run. The little boy with the sword, his name is Fred. He grows up and follows in his father's footsteps, goes to West Point, and then in World War I, he's a brigadier general and gets a medal of some honorary medal. So again, sort of stretching out the war. You don't know what you're going to find, but little images like that, you start to do the research and find out about them. So another image of a beautiful portrait of a young man, looks to be Civil War age. Look him up and find out he wasn't in the war, but he was a Senate page and played an important role in shepherding legislation through the House of Representatives and the Senate. So the side stories of the war, you get to see their faces. It really humanizes what happened during that time period. So that's just a few of the things that stuck with me.
Right. I think that's one thing that's big part of the Civil War that we don't have with other conflicts so much, is that when we study World War II or we study World War I, we get used to studying the troops overseas. That's the theater that we study, right? But we forget that with the Civil War, really the theater is the United States. So in one shape or form, everyone's involved. You're in the war zone. I mean, we've been blessed, I guess, to have the big pond between us and some of the conflicts. That's just how it's been. But in the Civil War, that's how it was. And so really all these images, whether they were in the military or not, there's some shape and form part of this full story of the Civil War.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's also true that over time, we talk about the participants of the Civil War differently than we did 25 years ago. Certainly different than we did during the Civil War centennial. You know, the idea of soldiers and battles, it's still out there, and it's still obviously very important to talk about. But now we're talking more about the experiences of people on the home front, the contributions of women, the contributions of enslaved people, whether they were in the U.S. colored troops or wherever else they were, talking about those things. And again, I think it really gets to humanizing the war. It gets to talking more broadly about a generation that was impacted by this. It was a horrific conflict, and it's too easy to romanticize it. And I think some of these stories help us understand that it was you, it was your neighbor, you know, it was everyone around you that was directly connected to this. It was happening right where we are.
Right. And, you know, it reminds me of when I lived in Russia for a short period, actually. I was speaking to people in Russia, Russians who were living in Moscow, and they would tell me about how their parents were veterans of, you know, the siege of Stalingrad, for example, during World War II. And, you know, there was a little bit of misconnect, because I'd be like, oh, wait, but I thought your grandparents didn't serve in the military. They weren't in the military. It's like, well, you don't have to be a veteran of the siege of Stalingrad to be a soldier. You know, if you were in Stalingrad when it was being bombarded, you're a veteran of Stalingrad, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of like the same thing in the Civil War, right? If you were in DC when people thought that Lee was coming across the Potomac, Yeah, I mean, that was very real. That was really a real thing, or if you're in Richmond and Grant's at Petersburg and he's right around the corner, that's a very real thing, whether you're in the military or not.
Well, your mention of Stalingrad and of Russia makes me think of the issue that we debuted at the show. I introduced that by talking about Ukraine and all of the images that we have seen in recent weeks, and how you can draw a direct line from those visual images to Matthew Brady. You're looking at the individual who pioneered photojournalism and how he transformed from a photographer of celebrities to sending out teams of photographers to document the battles. His transformation, his innovative spirit that he brought to this, and leveraging new technology to be able to make these images, really, it resonates with me even more now that I'm seeing what's happening in Ukraine. And then I'm looking back now at images of, the dead at Antietam, dead at Gettysburg, the city of Fredericksburg, pictures from 1862, 63. And it's like, wow, it really brings it home in a more visceral and different way for me.
And I'm glad we brought that up because one of the speakers we didn't talk about was yourself. And I think I think you did a very great job, linking kind of today with the past, with the Civil War, as you just did.
Yeah.
One of the things you did was feature the cover image for the newest edition of Military Images magazine.
Yes.
Can we talk about that? Because that was a jaw dropper.
I have to tell you, I can't think of a moment where when I held up the cover that there was an audible gasp in the audience. It was really amazing. I was not prepared for that. And just so the audience knows, the image that was on the cover was an unpublished view of Matthew Brady, probably in the last years of his life, probably taken in the early 1880s. And the way that it got to the cover dates back to, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago or so. I got into a conversation with a collector who was or is in progress of establishing a memorial to Brady, a new memorial inside Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C., where Brady and his wife were buried there. And he's making a new memorial with beautiful statues and reproductions of photographs. It's going to be great. But in researching, I thought, well, maybe I should do something here for the issue. And at that point, I had another plan. And this is maybe late November of last year. And so I'm looking at Brady's information, like, oh my gosh, his birth date is May 18th, which lines up with our spring issue. And then I look at his birth year, and it's 1822, 23, or 24. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's the Brady bicentennial. And that got me off and running. And it was right about that time that Doug York, who is my partner in doing the Civil War show in DC, and we're talking about doing others at other locations. He texts me randomly with this photograph. And I'm thinking, you are kidding me. I can't believe I'm seeing this. And I usually don't make any promises on the cover. I see a lot of great images, and I don't want to disappoint. And I want to have some flexibility in deciding what's going to be the cover image. But when I saw that on my phone from Doug, I said, please send me a high resolution scan and do not share this with anyone. And we'll do the reveal at the show. So it was great.
It truly was amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll definitely post a picture or something.
Oh, please do.
To share the newest edition, because that was something else. And you're right, it was a gasp, when people saw that. I don't think the gasp was as loud as when I saw the 79th New York image in there, though. I think I was a little bit louder.
I couldn't wait.
Um,
I couldn't wait to show that to you.
yeah, that's also a great image. So just so
Yeah,
people know, inside there is an image from Ron Field's collection,
yeah.
who's actually coming on the show by the end of this month, I think, for an interview. We're going to be doing
Yes,
something on his favorite Civil War uniforms,
yes.
because I know he's been doing a lot on uniforms. I grew up reading his books and stuff, so we're going to talk about his favorite Civil War uniforms. But the image in there is of three Highlanders in kilts in Washington, D.C., the early days of the war. It's a great image, and it just shows you the great images that come in this magazine. So if you're not a subscriber, you're really missing out on all these great images, you know.
Well,
So
yeah, and
definitely
also I'll point out
subscribe.
it's a Brady. That particular
Yes.
image was taken by Brady Studios. So yeah, yeah, that's part of the joy beyond the cover, as you point out what's inside, unearthing these images that oftentimes have never been published before is what excites me, to be able to showcase them and then to be able to put some interpretation behind them, because there's just so much to learn. And when you see three Highlanders standing there in a studio, full kilts, full uniforms, this is how they wanted us to see them. They were celebrating who they are. They were in this. It's a Brady photograph. I should tell everybody it's a Brady photograph from like the summer of '61. So we're just a couple of months after the bombardment of Fort Sumter. These guys are the first responders. They get into these beautiful uniforms, right? And go off to Washington to save the country. And this, you see them at that moment when this is all going on for them in the background. Just fascinating stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's my favorite regiment for sure. I guess the
I
69th and
know.
79th vie for my heart there. But one of the cool things about it is that I've often read in the primary sources that a few of the Highlanders, or a quarter of the Highlanders, marched in wearing kilts. Others were wearing the plaid trousers. Um, but this proves that they did come in with their kilts. You know, you actually now see it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Another
And
thing that's really cool about it is that a lot of the accounts will make fun and say some of the Highlanders, I guess, so quick to, get in uniform and come and not miss out on the war, their kilts didn't quite fit and things weren't quite, and you can see how the kilt is a little bit too big for some of these guys,
yeah, yeah.
a little oversized. But that was the army back then. It's even the army today, right? When does everyone get a fitted uniform, right? Usually the army just throws something at you and say, okay, put
Well,
this on. Might be too tall, too short, too
well,
long, whatever.
promise me you'll ask Ron Field about some of these questions, because not only, as you know, you pointed out that image is his, but Ron has helped open my eyes to all the challenges around contracting for uniform production and all of the unevenness and inconsistencies from contractor to contractor. So it's another, we think of today's world as much more regimented and all of that, and but back then it wasn't there yet.
Oh, no. And I think one of the contractors was Brooks Brothers,
Yeah,
and they're actually known for being very shoddy, right? They're not very good. And so I
right.
don't really shop at Brooks Brothers now because I'm a Civil War buff. And I read that. I said, oh, it must be poor quality. No, I'm kidding. I'm sure Brooks Brothers does a great job now. Lincoln wore Brooks
Well,
Brothers. So
just don't ask them to make your Civil War uniform.
that's it. Right. Exactly. Exactly. That's where the Union soldiers went wrong, right? Suits fine, but fatigue blouse, forget it.
Buy your kilt someplace else.
Right. Shout out to another sponsor. We just talked about shoddy uniforms. Well, you won't get shoddy equipment from the badge maker. He does great core badges, Civil War ID discs, all authentic. So definitely check him out. I'll put a link in the description to all my sponsors. But I mean, as we're talking about all this, one of the other projects you have going on is a book is coming out, right? A new book.
That is true. That is true. Yeah, a project that is could not have happened without Military Images magazine. During my editorship, which has been since 2014, is when I published my first issue. I made a special effort to gather portraits and profiles of soldiers that had specific Gettysburg experiences. They may have been wounded, they may have captured a flag, They may have helped someone off the battlefield, some unique image, or pardon me, unique story, and of course, an original wartime image. So over the last 8 years or so, we've published more than 150 original images and stories of these soldiers and some citizens, some women who served as nurses. And I looked at them all, made some really hard choices and picked 100 of those, and then re-edited them, did a little bit of additional research, and made them into 100 short stories, and arranged them in chronological order from the earliest activities before the battle to the Confederate withdrawal back to Virginia. So those 100 stories are a chronology through the experiences and oftentimes letters and diaries and journal entries from these individuals talking about what it was like. And so that book is, in fact, I'm doing the very final edits this weekend from the printer, and it will be out this summer. So I'm excited about it.
Fantastic. And so these are all stories from the Battle of Gettysburg, right? And if people are interested in the Battle of Gettysburg, definitely check out this book when it comes out. I have to also give a shout out to our other sponsor, Civil War Trails. So if you want to carry this book with you and actually walk the trail and see where these guys fought, and where some of them may have taken their last breaths, where they experienced the war at its most bitter, definitely check out Civil War Trails, because they're marking all of those untold Civil War sites for us as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show and doing this. I really appreciate it.
Great fun, Paul. Always enjoy talking with you, and look forward to more. And thanks to everybody for listening.